All right, hello everyone, and welcome to my channel. It's an educational channel, and it's certainly not big on the production. Right now, I've got my camera poised at an angle that makes me look sideways or diagonal, but that's not the important part. So for now, we will continue. We do educational videos on this channel. We focus on great theories of everything from obscure sources, people that spend their whole life working on something and have retrieved some gems that we can use to work on our paradigm shifting, our awakening to 5D consciousness, and our formation of a holistic worldview, along with our mental, spiritual, and physical health. And today is the 35th video that we've done on Daniel Ingram and his book called Mastering the Core Teachings of the Buddha. And Ingram spent a lot of time over in the Far East and other places as well, going to meditation retreats, soaking up the ancient wisdom of Buddhism from monks, and from his experiences on the cushion meditating for hours on end, or 1 hour of sitting and then an hour of walking and then an hour of reclining and then another hour of sitting, or whatever. And he's made some great findings, and he's made this kind of like a reference work where you can really find anything that you could possibly want to find as far as Buddhism goes. And he also lists a lot of great sources, other sources that you can also consult. We're talking about the formless jhanas. I believe this is chapter 28, and we're about to start a section called the fifth jhana, boundless space. And again, a jhana is like a state of attention or a mode of attention or a trance state. It's this kind of a thing that your attention gets drawn into, and it can be can get really molded, like in a hard jhana, or it can be rather vague. So he talks about those distinctions, but there in the concentration practices of the Buddha, there are 8 jhanas, 4 jhanas with form and 4 that are formless. And so this 5th jhana is the first one of the formless jhanas. To attain, it's called boundless space. To attain boundless space, the 5th jhana, we continue to cultivate the 4th jhana and begin to gently pay less attention to the objects or occurrences in the meditation space and more to space itself. How big is reality? Tuning into the panoramic quality of attention itself when in the 4th jhana can be very helpful. This requires a careful balance of attending to what is going on while tuning out a substantial portion of what's going on, and finding that this slippery balance takes practice. Cultivating the formless realms benefits from good practice conditions, such as a very quiet place to practice, good posture, such that the body doesn't hurt, and lack of other distractions and irritants. When the balance is right, forms then slip away like ghosts into thin air, and the mind turns to boundless space, the fifth jhana as the object of concentration. Initially, we may notice the wide open and boundaryless quality of the fourth jhana as a formed version of the fifth jhana, like a halfway point between the two that is starting to turn from the fourth jhana to the fifth jhana way of perceiving space. And then we take that aspect as an object to the exclusion of the aspects of experience that are no longer obviously bounded. This is the two-step approach to attaining this jhana. For most practitioners, this is closer to the way it happens. Some can just detune from form and thus go more directly to the fifth jhana from the fourth. Both methods are just fine, and it is interesting to play with making the transition both ways. The fifth jhana is often called infinite space, and the following one is often called infinite consciousness. But I prefer the word boundless because it is much closer to the actual experience of these stages. People imagine that they might simultaneously perceive the whole of space for billions of light years in all directions, which is obviously daunting to ponder. But what happens is that perceptual boundaries drop away and a very unitive and vast feeling openness prevails. This open quality itself becomes the primary focus rather than what is unified in that openness. This aspect was already present in the fourth jhana, but now it predominates. The same is true of the aspects of the next formless realm. The fifth jhana is not necessarily as perfectly clean as it sounds, depending on how solidly we are in this state. But it is still quite spectacular, at least until we get used to it. Once we get used to the fifth jhana, as with so many spectacular things, it eventually gets boring. And strangely enough, when this genuinely happens on its own, rather than trying to simulate that boredom because you read it here, that is a sign of maturation. When this state is really cultivated, all or most images and sense of a body are gone, and almost all that is left is vastness. When this state is mastered, all bodily qualities and ordinary forms are totally gone, and the sensations of boundaryless vastness pervade. There is still subtle thought operating and the illusion of a separate self, that is, duality, but the mind is extremely quiet and the duality very subtle. Alternatively, we could reasonably hold the view that the fifth jhana, being clearly something entirely different from the ordinary material world around us, is itself mentally created, and thus that the fifth jhana is purely thought-made, as though we have entered a totally different realm or plane. This would imply that the reverse of subtle thought is true, and that it is not that thought has become subtle, but a refined, stabilized, unusual way of perceiving thought has arisen and become so potent as to displace ordinary material experience. Regardless of how you choose to conceive of what is going on in the fifth jhana, the equanimity of the fourth jhana remains, as the formless realms use that state as their foundation. Sounds might still be noticeable depending on the depth of the state and how loud the sounds are. A strong practitioner will cut out all but loud sounds when in this jhana. This may appear in other jhanas as well. Note, if we attain this state while meditating with eyes open, it may have a very different quality to it than with eyes closed. Formless realms with eyes open, you might reasonably ask? Yes, here we get into interesting territory when it comes to categorizing meditative phenomena. There is something I term J4, J5, meaning that we are really in the fourth jhana, but have tuned strongly to its boundless elements while not detuning entirely from form, achieving some hybrid that sits on the boundary between the two. Many eyes open experience have that vast, seemingly unitive aspects are like this. However, a rare few with strong concentration can shift attention to spaces that have truly detuned from what is around them in ordinary visual terms and to the vastness of a wholly different space from the ordinary material one, yet with eyes open. It is not uncommon for people to get into the fifth jhana and then retract back to the fourth when the body drops away, as they can feel ungrounded or as though they are not breathing. It is true that the breath can become very subtle or nearly imperceptible even in the fourth, but that gets much more extreme in boundless space, the fifth. And until we get used to not being able to feel anything breathing, that can cause some initial instability. As we get more used to this state, we realize the body is going to breathe because that is what it does. And we can relax and go back to enjoying these jhanas. It is also worth knowing that there are some insight stages, specifically the third and fourth, described later, in which the breath sometimes does stop, and those stages can also have formless aspects. Whereas in those stages, the breath does stop. In this jhana, it does not stop, but rather cannot be felt unless intention tunes back that way. From the fifth jhana, meditators have a few options. 1, get stuck, which may be more likely if they are incorrectly practicing non-dual formless practices by fixating too much on phrases such as space-like awareness. 2, go on to the next formless realm, boundless consciousness. Or 3, investigate this state so as to attain insight into it. For this option, special care and extreme precision must be brought to each instant of the many sensations making up the perception of space, silence, or equanimity, so as to see each of these experiences arise and pass completely in each instant, not satisfy and not be a self or the property of a self. It may seem odd to think of the sensations of space arising and passing away in each instant, but space is a conditioned aspect of relative reality and is thus impermanent along with every other aspect of experiential reality. This can be an important attainment, as some of the last illusory holdouts against the realization of the truth of impermanence are things like the sense that somehow space must be stable and abiding, even though careful attention to it reveals that it too appears and disappears in each instant. The experience of space is a constantly changing set of sensate qualities created on the fly, so to speak, and we can learn to perceive this directly and clearly. Really, we can think of the sense doors as the textures of space, a transient space that is fluxing and flowing like everything else. There are few things quite as odd, profound, and possibly disconcerting as investigating the first 3 formless realms and perceiving them strobe in and out of existence. But this is Powerful practice and a very valuable and high attainment. In certain phases of practice, I spent a lot of time doing this and got a lot out of it. Disentangling what sensations seem to be still, a subtle knot of illusory subject-likeness in boundless space can also be exceedingly profound, because this really strips things to the bone. What is left that seems to be an observer, however subtle, may become obvious at this point. Again, the meditator may leave this state and begin insight practices, with the benefits of the residue of this state calming, opening, and stabilizing the mind for a short time after it ends. Okay, that's the end of that section on the fifth jhana. And we are now moving to a section on the sixth jhana called boundless consciousness. If meditators wish to go further into the formless realms, they should continue to cultivate attention to boundless space and notice that they are conscious of it, and thus space is filled with consciousness. At some point, the mind will abandon boundless space and shift to perceiving boundless consciousness, the sixth jhana. This can feel profoundly unitive, as consciousness seems to fill the whole universe, though really it just fills the field of experience. Again, equanimity prevails. This state has a sense of presence to it that boundless space doesn't, a diffuse presence that seems to be part of space itself, rather than centralized on this side. It is also a great staging ground for exploration of the psychic powers, as backtracking just slightly and adding to that conscious space, meaning bringing in just a bit of form, albeit potentially quite unusual form, can cause remarkable experiences. Some may describe this jhana as space becoming luminous, with a pervasive bright presence or clear light. And here is where some can run into trouble. The issue is that plenty of traditions posit an awareness, a ground of being, an intrinsic luminosity, a Buddha nature, a Tao, and the like, with capital letters, implying some grand, final, definitive, stable, ultimate something that is in some way distinct from the rest of manifest sensate reality. There are plenty of spiritual teachings that mention things like true self and the like, as if there is some permanent, stable, creative presence that knows all of this, that is all of this, that pervades all of this. In fact, as people get to certain stages of practice, such notions can become extremely compelling and seem extremely true. Truths, excuse me, truths that seem justified by our direct experience and attainments. There can even be skillful uses for these sorts of teachings, contrary to what some dogmatic Buddhist purists will say, as they can point to stages along a developmental continuum that are further than many will attain. Still, they are not as far as one can take insight practices, as one with strong insight will be able to deconstruct the sense that there is truly some ground or being that is stable or remains across moments. Boundless consciousness is one of these compelling attainments that can fool people in this way. It is a trap, one of the golden chains. The golden chains are seductive and profound effects of spiritual practice that can totally gum up the works, trapping people like pigs at Circe's table, like addicts in a crack house, like misers in their vaults of money. They seem so enjoyable, so cosmic, so right, so fantastic, so amazing, so profound, so mind-blowing that it would seem crazy to question them or investigate them or be friends with anyone who would possibly be so gauche as to point out that there might be a problem, except that there very much is a problem. All of the jhanas can be golden chains, but some of the later ones, particularly the sixth jhana, are extremely sticky and tempting, like the biggest sticky bun ever, like a vast, silent bathtub full of honey. They can very strongly convince people that there is a grand and final truth here, and that the grand and final truth is a permanent consciousness, an eternal watcher, an awareness that is forever, and that will be an eternal and unchanging refuge that protects us, that lets us off the hook, that we could disappear into and yet remain. Nothing of the kind can be found, but people caught up in experiences such as the sixth jhana sometimes go chasing them anyway. Take this as a strong warning if you begin to suspect that there is really some independent ground, some super space that knows. Let sirens blare, warning lights flash, and the earth beneath you tremble with the thunderous, roaring message, and preferably a large pointing fingers, go back, this is not the way, which should really be interpreted as investigate, see impermanence in all things, see dissatisfactoriness, and not you, even in boundless consciousness. This point will be repeated later with respect to various similar attainments that can also convince us that there is some stable je ne sais quoi, but the more times you hear it, the better. All of that said, here is a perfectly valid counterpoint. There is something truly profound about this jhana. It is just that this profundity should not be taken to more than it is, to be more than it is. Seeing the intrinsic luminosity of anything is profound. And boundless consciousness gives us a broad and profound taste of this, writing it on the mind. And that is a good thing, to have written on the mind. So while heeding the warnings above, all of which are valid, also realize that spending time in the sixth jhana can do great things to the mind and the brain. It is showing you a valuable piece of the puzzle. Just don't take it for the whole puzzle. There are a number of standard options from the sixth jhana. Meditators can, 1, get stuck, which again can happen fairly easily if they are mistaking non-dual formless practices for meditation on the concentration object of boundless consciousness, or fixating on that jhana as being a ground of being, true self, or awareness, watcher, etc. Again, due, for example, to misunderstanding the phrase space-like awareness. 2, go on to cultivate the next formless realm, nothingness. Or 3, investigate boundless consciousness and then begin the progress of insight. For this last option, and just as we did with boundless space, extremely careful attention must be given to each moment of the appearance and disappearance of sensations making up the perceptions of consciousness, vastness, or equanimity. Each moment of perception of boundless consciousness is a fresh pattern of totally transient sensations. Great precision must be brought to observing that these sensations are impermanent, do not satisfy and cannot be a self or its property. Because of how fundamentally disconcerting, unsatisfactory it can be to have the three illusions shattered, even at this level of expansiveness, clarity, and simplicity, this is not at all an easy practice to do, but can be very powerful. It is much more likely that such insights into the true nature of the first three formless realms will arise spontaneously due to previous skillful insight practices. So you might wonder, what is observing boundless consciousness strobe in and out of reality? Now there is a question, perhaps the question, and there is nothing like doing the experiment in order to answer it. Okay, that is the end of that section on the sixth jhana. The next section is called the seventh jhana. Nothingness is the name of the seventh jhana. And let's see, I think we have time to read a few paragraphs here. If the meditator wishes to attain the next formless realm, the seventh jhana, known as nothingness, they can simply cultivate the jhana of boundless consciousness and divest themselves of any form of fixation on or fascination with the vastness and luminosity of that state. That is, allowing disenchantment to naturally and organically arise in relation to boundless consciousness. Eventually, the mind will let go of the sixth jhana and shift to the jhana of nothingness. This state can be described as like space with all the lights completely out, so that there is no vastness and almost no sensations other than those of nothingness. It is almost as though attention is out of phase with nearly all phenomena except those that imply nothingness. They are still there somewhere, but they are not being attended to. Note that there must be sensations that suggest nothingness, however subtle. I have gotten into debates with people about how they think that there is nothing going on in nothingness, and they are certain of this based on their experience. But given that there is an experience to base this on, by definition, it must be sensate, however exceedingly refined, subtle, abstract, or vague. This jhana is different from the previous two formless realms in that the fifth and sixth are quite present to reality as we think we've known it, and in some way and panoramic in perspective, whereas nothingness is more turned away from phenomena as we think we know them, and perhaps more focused in some hard-to-explain way. There is, however, some very subtle thought and an extremely subtle sense of a separate self, if that process has been totally seen through already. It is very easy to be convinced that the seventh jhana is more than it is, due to the profundity of having the mind detuned in this unusually comprehensive way. A parallel can be drawn between the first jhana and the fifth jhana of boundless space, the second jhana and the sixth of boundless consciousness, and the third jhana and the seventh of nothingness. Just as the third jhana is sort of the counterpoint to the second, like an inversion or the other side of the coin, just so nothingness is like the other side of the coin of boundless consciousness. In boundless consciousness, there is pervasive, wide-open, formless presence. In nothingness, it is like the exact opposite. This pattern of mirroring, but adding some additional twist, is one to pay attention to, as it is a theme that will recur often. And remember this section when I mention fractals later. As before, the seventh jhana can have different degrees of intensity to it. Even when we are not strongly in it, there is a sense of being out of phase with reality, like being dissociated. Reality is there, but you have tuned it out on your radio. Note well, this is very different from just being checked out in the colloquial sense. Though there may be similar aspects, but this takes being checked out to a level of skillful refinement far beyond the ordinary. While in theory equanimity prevails, well-developed nothingness initially can be a bit scary for the same reasons that being in a dark room can be scary, at least until we get used to it. This can cause some instability in this state for those who are used to the width and presence of the first two formless realms. Now, consciousness and space are basically gone. However, there is still awareness of this state, indicating that there can be awareness that is neither the consciousness nor the space highlighted in the first two formless realms. Basically, if there is consciousness, if there is any quality, including nothingness, then that quality is the same as the awareness of itself. You could say that the qualities of experience, however they are, and specifically including those sensations that make up or imply nothingness, are intrinsically present, manifest, and aware right where they are, as they are, without any separate thing that knows. Each demonstrates the three characteristics, though if we are cultivating this as a shamatha jhana, then that aspect should be ignored, if possible. Note well, I point to no stable, abiding, independently existing ground of awareness or any such thing by saying all of this, a point made for those who wish to attempt to locate some ultimacy, either phenomenologically or ontologically in nothingness. Okay, we're going to stop it right there. We'll resume tomorrow when we come back. Thanks for tuning in today. Have a great day.